You touched at least 5 of these today without thinking about it. The glass in your windshield, the coating on your frying pan, the pills in your medicine cabinet, the drink in your fridge, the oven that reheated your lunch in 90 seconds. None of these things were supposed to exist. Every single one of them is the result of a mistake, a spill, a forgotten petri dish, or somebody grabbing the wrong part off a shelf. A French chemist dropped a flask and gave the world laminated glass. A Swiss engineer pulled burrs off his dog and invented Velcro. An American radar technician felt a candy bar melting in his pocket and handed us the microwave. These are 20 inventions that exist entirely by accident, and without them, your daily life would look absolutely nothing like it does right now. Number 20. Safety glass. It's 1903 and a French chemist named Edouard Benedictus is moving through his lab, probably thinking about something completely unrelated to what he's about to invent. He knocks a glass flask off a shelf. The flask hits the floor and shatters, but it doesn't fall apart. The pieces hold their shape, cracked and fractured, but still somehow together. Benedictus discovers the flask had been coated inside with a dried layer of cellulose nitrate, a thin plastic residue from some earlier experiment nobody had bothered to clean up. He wrote down the idea, set it aside, and then read a newspaper story about people getting facial lacerations from car windshields in accidents. He connected the two. Today, every car windshield on the planet is laminated safety glass. All of it traces back to a dropped flask and a dirty lab counter. But his accident at least produced something useful on the first try. The next one on this list took years before anyone could figure out what it was even for. Number 19. Silly putty. It's 1943. The United States is in World War II, and there's a rubber shortage because Japan had cut off supplies from Southeast Asia. An engineer named James Wright at General Electric in New Haven was tasked with creating a synthetic rubber substitute. He mixed boric acid with silicone oil and got something that bounced, stretched, and held its shape, but did absolutely nothing rubber actually needed to do. It couldn't make tires. It couldn't make boots. Engineers passed it around the lab for years trying to find a single practical use, and nobody could. A toy marketer named Peter Hodgson saw it at a party in 1949, bought the rights for $147, packaged it in plastic eggs, and sold 250,000 units in 72 hours. The military needed rubber. Kids needed a bouncy blob. The universe gave us the blob. Number 18. Teflon. Roy Plunkett was a chemist at DuPont in Deepwater, New Jersey in 1938, working on developing new refrigerants. He had a cylinder of tetrafluoroethylene gas he'd been experimenting with, and when he opened the valve one morning, nothing came out. The gas was gone, but the cylinder still weighed the same as when it was full. Plunkett sawed the cylinder open, which reveals quite a lot about his personality, and found the inside coated with a white, waxy, extremely slippery solid. The gas had polymerized on its own overnight inside the pressurized container. He quickly established that this material was chemically inert, heat-resistant, and almost frictionless. DuPont eventually turned it into the coating that now lives on roughly half the cookware in the world. The empty cylinder had a lot more going for it than most full ones. Number 17. Velcro. It's 1941, and a Swiss electrical engineer named Georges de Mestral goes for a walk in the Jura Mountains with his dog near Geneva. When they get back home, both of them are covered in burrs, those small hooked seed pods that cling to anything with a fiber. Most people pick them off and move on. De Mestral put one under a microscope and found tiny hooks gripping tiny loops. Then, he spent 8 years trying to replicate this exact structure in textile form. Manufacturers thought he was wasting everyone's time. He eventually made it work with nylon. The fashion industry laughed. The aerospace industry did not. NASA put Velcro in spacesuits and on equipment used during spacewalks, and the fashion world came around soon after. 8 years of work, all because a dog needed a walk. Number 16. Post-it notes. In 1968, a chemist at 3M in St. Paul, Minnesota named Spencer Silver was trying to develop a super strong adhesive. He completely failed. What he made instead was the exact opposite, a glue so weak it left no residue and could be peeled off any surface without damaging it. Silver spent the next 6 years trying to convince anyone inside 3M that this failure had a future. Nobody could think of a use for it. Then, in 1974, a colleague named Art Fry was sitting in church choir practice, frustrated that his bookmarks kept sliding out of his hymnal. He remembered Silver's adhesive, coated a strip of paper with it, and had a bookmark that stayed put and came out cleanly. 3M launched Post-it notes in 1980. They sold out. 6 years of rejection, and then one bored guy in church changed everything. Number 15, WD-40. The name stands for Water Displacement 40th Attempt, which tells you most of what you need to know. It's 1953, and a chemist named Norm Larson at the Rocket Chemical Company in San Diego is trying to develop a formula to prevent the outer surface of Atlas missiles from corroding. The first 39 attempts failed. The 40th worked. Employees at the company liked the formula so much they started sneaking cans home for squeaky door hinges and rusted bolts on their cars. Management noticed the cans kept walking out the door, figured out what was happening, and started selling the formula in retail stores in 1958. It now has over 2,000 documented household uses. The formula was designed to protect a missile. The lasting legacy is people using it on their garage doors. Number 14, saccharin. Konstantin Fallberg was a chemist working in Ira Remsen's laboratory at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore in 1879, running experiments on coal tar derivatives. One evening, he sat down for dinner and noticed his bread tasted unexpectedly sweet. He hadn't added any sugar. He hadn't touched anything sweet all day. He licked his fingers and realized the sweetness was coming from a chemical compound he had synthesized in the lab earlier that afternoon. Because he hadn't properly washed his hands before sitting down to eat, he went back, isolated the compound, named it saccharin, and filed a patent without mentioning Remsen. The professional dispute that followed lasted the rest of both their careers. Saccharin became the first artificial sweetener ever sold commercially, found because a chemist came home from work and ate dinner without washing his hands. Number 13, X-rays. Wilhelm Röntgen was a physicist at the University of Würzburg in 1895, experimenting with cathode ray tubes wrapped in black cardboard. A fluorescent screen across the room started glowing when it had no reason to. Something invisible was passing through the cardboard. Röntgen spent 6 weeks living in his lab, barely going home, running test after test. He called it X-radiation because he had no idea what it was. He placed his wife's hand between the tube and a photographic plate and made the first image of bones inside a living person. She said it felt like looking at her own death. Röntgen won the first Nobel Prize in Physics in 1901. One screen that wasn't supposed to glow changed medicine permanently. Number 12, penicillin. Alexander Fleming was a bacteriologist at St. Mary's Hospital in London in 1928. He had left petri dishes full of Staphylococcus bacteria sitting out before going on holiday. When he came back, one dish had been contaminated by mold that had drifted in through an open window. Around the mold, every bacterial colony was dead. A less observant scientist throws the dish away and starts fresh. Fleming looked at it, realized something extraordinary was happening. Isolated the active compound and named it penicillin. It took another decade and 2 other researchers to turn it into a working drug, but by World War II, it was saving thousands of soldiers' lives, all from a dish he forgot to clean before his vacation. Number 11, super glue. Harry Coover was a chemist at Eastman Kodak in Tennessee in 1942, trying to develop a clear plastic for gun sights during the war effort. He synthesized cyanoacrylate and immediately rejected it because it stuck to everything it touched and ruined every measuring instrument in the lab. He shelved it and moved on entirely. 6 years later, His colleague Fred Joyner was testing the same compound, tried to measure its refractive index using two optical lenses, and fused them together permanently. They had just destroyed a very expensive piece of equipment. And then they realized what they had. Eastman Kodak brought it to store shelves in 1958. Two failed experiments that wrecked lab equipment gave the world one of the most useful adhesives ever made. And if you think that's a strange origin story, wait until you hear how the next one was invented, because the top 10 on this list get significantly weirder. Number 10. Vulcanized rubber. Charles Goodyear had been obsessed with stabilizing rubber for nearly a decade by 1839. Natural rubber was essentially useless. It melted into a sticky mess in summer heat and cracked into brittle pieces in winter cold. Goodyear had been mixing rubber with every chemical he could find, testing hundreds of combinations, going broke in the process. One day in Woburn, Massachusetts, he accidentally dropped a rubber and sulfur mixture onto a hot stove. Instead of melting, it charred at the edges but came out tough and elastic in the middle, unaffected by temperature. He called the process vulcanization. It took 5 more years and serious debt to perfect it, but that stove accident eventually made automobile tires, rubber boots, and waterproof clothing possible. Number 9. Play-Doh. In Cincinnati in 1956, a nursery school teacher named Kay Zufall was looking for a simple craft material for her class. Her brother-in-law, Joe McVicker, worked at Rainbow Crafts, a company whose main product was a compound used to clean wallpaper soot. It was soft, non-toxic, and easy to reshape. The problem was that new vinyl wallpapers had killed the market, and the product was dying. Kay used it in her classroom. The kids loved it. And she convinced McVicker to rebrand it as a children's modeling compound. He sold it to schools first, then toy stores. Rainbow Crafts made nearly $3 million in its first year. A failed wallpaper cleaner became a billion-dollar toy because a teacher needed something for art time. Number 8. Stainless steel. Harry Brearley was a metallurgist in Sheffield, England in 1913, tasked with finding a steel alloy for gun barrels that wouldn't erode from intense heat and friction. He experimented with adding chromium at different concentrations, failed repeatedly, and threw his discarded alloys into a growing scrap pile in the corner of his lab. Months later, he noticed one batch of scraps hadn't rusted at all, while everything around it had corroded heavily. It was the high chromium alloy. He tried to sell it to Sheffield's cutlery industry, and they weren't interested. It took years for the world to understand what had been sitting in that scrap pile. Now stainless steel is in virtually every kitchen, hospital, and restaurant on Earth. Number 7. Mauve. William Perkin was an 18-year-old chemistry student in London in 1856, working in a makeshift bedroom lab. He was trying to synthesize quinine, the anti-malaria drug, from coal tar. Every attempt produced a blackish, sticky mess. Perkin tried rinsing a flask with alcohol, and the residue dissolved into a rich purple solution. He tested it on silk, and it dyed the fabric a vivid, permanent purple. Natural purple dyes at the time were incredibly expensive. Perkin dropped out of school, patented the world's first synthetic dye, and was a millionaire before he turned 20. He had been trying to cure malaria and accidentally invented the entire synthetic dye industry instead. Number 6. The pacemaker. Wilson Greatbatch was an electrical engineer in Buffalo, New York in 1956, building a device designed to record and study heart sounds. He reached into a box of resistors and grabbed the wrong one, a 1 mega-ohm resistor instead of the 10,000 ohm one the circuit needed. When he wired it in, the device began emitting a rhythmic electrical pulse at almost exactly the rate of a human heartbeat. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he understood exactly what he was looking at. He spent the next 2 years miniaturizing the design, and by 1960, it was implanted in a human patient for the first time. Today, over 600,000 pacemakers are implanted worldwide every year. One wrong resistor, hundreds of millions of extra heartbeats. Number 5. Bubble wrap. It's 1957, and two engineers named Al Fielding and Mark Chavan are working out of Hawthorne, New Jersey, trying to invent a new kind of textured wallpaper. They sealed two shower curtains together by running them through a heat sealing machine and ended up with a sheet of plastic completely full of trapped air bubbles. It looked unusual. It did not look like wallpaper anyone would want. They tried marketing it as greenhouse insulation instead, and nobody wanted that either. For 3 full years, they pitched the bubbled plastic sheet to every industry they could approach and found no market for it anywhere. Then, in 1960, a marketer at their company convinced IBM to use the material as protective cushioning around a new computer being shipped across the country. The computers arrived undamaged, and the shipping industry immediately understood what Fielding and Chavan had been sitting on. Today, roughly 1 billion feet of bubble wrap is manufactured every year. Someone also figured out along the way that popping the individual bubbles one by one is enormously satisfying, a discovery that has wasted an unknowable amount of collective human productivity ever since. Number 4. Aspirin. Felix Hoffmann was a chemist at the Bayer Company in Germany in 1897. His father suffered from severe rheumatoid arthritis and had been taking sodium salicylate, the standard treatment at the time, for years. The drug reduced his pain, but it also caused violent stomach cramping and persistent nausea that made daily use almost unbearable. Hoffmann wasn't assigned to fix this. He was working on it in his own time, using lab resources at his disposal, trying specifically to find a modified version of the compound his father could take every day without suffering through the side effects. He synthesized acetyl salicylic acid, same anti-inflammatory result, dramatically gentler on the stomach. His father tried it, and the difference was clear within days. Bayer registered the drug commercially as aspirin in 1899. It is now the most consumed pharmaceutical in human history. A son was working in his spare time trying to help one man sit down at the dinner table without being in pain. He ended up filling medicine cabinets in more than 140 countries. Number 3. Chewing gum. Thomas Adams was an inventor in Staten Island, New York in 1869, and he had spent over a year trying to make a workable rubber substitute out of chicle, a natural latex extracted from sapodilla trees in Mexico. He had tested it for boots, rain gear, toys, and bicycle tires. Every single application failed. Adams was so frustrated he was seriously considering dumping his entire remaining stock into New York Harbor when he walked into a drugstore one evening and watched a little girl buy some paraffin wax chewing gum, the bland, tasteless kind that was the only option available at the time. He remembered that Mexican workers had told him they chewed raw chicle habitually. He went home, boiled a small batch of it, and brought it to the same drugstore the following morning. It sold the same day. Adams went into manufacturing immediately. Chicle was completely useless as rubber. As it turned out, it was essentially perfect for everything else. Number 2. Coca-Cola. John Pemberton was a pharmacist in Atlanta, Georgia in 1886, and he was trying to solve a personal problem. He had been wounded in the Civil War and developed a morphine dependency during his recovery. He wanted to create a non-addictive medicinal syrup, something that treated headaches and fatigue without the dangers. His original formula included wine and was selling reasonably well in Atlanta. Then, the city passed prohibition legislation banning alcohol. Pemberton stripped the wine out and reformulated it as a concentrated syrup meant to be mixed with plain, still water at the pharmacy counter. One afternoon, a soda fountain assistant named Willis Venable mixed the syrup with carbonated water instead, either by mistake or because the soda tap was simply the closer option. The customer tasted it and preferred it significantly over anything Pemberton had made before, and he began marketing the carbonated version specifically after that. He sold the complete rights to the formula before he died, reportedly for around $2,000. The brand is currently worth over $260 billion. He had been trying to treat his own addiction. Someone reached for the wrong tap. Number 1. The microwave oven. Percy Spencer was a self-taught engineer at Raytheon's research facility in Cambridge, Massachusetts in 1945. He had assembled more radar magnetrons during World War II than any individual on Earth, and was now back to standard research. One afternoon, standing in front of an active magnetron array, he noticed that the chocolate peanut butter bar in his shirt pocket had melted into a warm, gooey mess. He hadn't felt any heat at all. Spencer found this interesting rather than annoying, which tells you something about the kind of person he was. He aimed a bag of popcorn kernels at the magnetron, and they popped immediately. The next day, he brought a raw egg into the lab, pointed the magnetron at it, and watched it explode into a colleague's face, which counts as both a scientific discovery and a safety lesson. Raytheon patented the microwave cooking process that same year. Their first commercial unit, the Radarange, stood nearly 6 feet tall, weighed over 700 pounds, and cost $5,000, roughly the price of a car. By the 1970s, countertop models cost a few $100s. By 1975, microwaves were outselling gas ranges in the United States. Percy Spencer's melted candy bar now sits in roughly 90% of American kitchens. Look at what all 20 of these have in common. Not one of them came from a plan. Not one of them came from a brilliant mind sitting alone with a whiteboard mapping out the future. They came from dropped flasks, dirty hands, forgotten petri dishes, wrong resistors, melted candy bars, and a dog that needed a walk. The most important things in your kitchen, your car, your medicine cabinet, and your pocket all exist because somebody was paying attention when something went wrong. That might be the most useful lesson on this entire list. If you want more stories like these, the next video about the biggest inventions that were stolen from their real creators is on screen right now. Click it.